She was barred from entering Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant for being black, a wheelchair user, and a woman. 6 weeks later, she owned the place. This is the story of Maya Richardson, a woman who not only opened doors, but built new ones. Welcome to the new Le Jardin, where inclusion is true luxury. The October rain tapped rhythmically against the tall glass windows of Le Jardin, creating a soft, almost meditative sound that contrasted with the imposing atmosphere of the main dining hall. The restaurant, nestled in the heart of the Upper East Side, was known not only for its refined cuisine, but also as a bastion of New York's old elite, a place where smiles were subtle, gestures restrained, and black presence historically confined to the kitchen or service staff. Le Jardin was a symbol, a place where bankers closed confidential deals in private booths, where traditional families celebrated generations of privilege over candlelit dinners, and where the past still lingered in every detail, from the baccarat chandeliers hanging from the ceiling to the antique French furniture that had borne silent witness to decades of exclusive whispers. On that rainy Thursday afternoon, Maya Richardson approached the main entrance with the calculated confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going and what that place symbolized. At 38, Maya glided in her motorized wheelchair with the same grace others walked through the doors in Louboutins. Her dark skin shimmered under the restaurant's golden awning lights, and her hair was pulled back into a sleek bun that framed the sharp contours of her face. She wore a custom navy blue blazer, a white silk blouse, and tailored trousers that draped perfectly over her motionless legs. Resting on her lap was a caramel-colored Italian leather briefcase. Inside it, the documents that sealed the realization of a dream born in a cramped Detroit kitchen, between old pots and the scent of sautéed onions. Now, that dream had a name, Le Jardin, and she was its new owner. Born and raised on the east side of Detroit, Maya was the daughter of Sarah Richardson, a widowed nurse who worked double shifts at 2 hospitals to put food on the table. She grew up in a neighborhood where the wail of sirens was more common than birdsong. Her childhood was marked by hardship, but also by deep affection. There was an abundance of love and of seasoning. Sarah cooked with soul, and Maya learned early how to turn simple ingredients into something unforgettable. At 16, tragedy came without warning. A drunk driver ran a red light and struck the car Maya was riding in on her way home from school. The impact crushed the rear of the vehicle. Maya survived, but lost all movement from the waist down. The following months were spent in hospitals, physical therapy, and emotional recovery. She grieved not only the body that would never be the same, but the dreams that those around her assumed she should now abandon. But she didn't abandon them. She simply reimagined them. She enrolled at the University of Michigan, earned a degree in business administration, and soon moved to San Francisco, where the tech ecosystem promised less judgment and more opportunity. There, between cafe tables filled with coders and sleepless nights of brainstorming, she developed an innovative supply chain management app. The software caught the attention of Silicon Valley investors and was eventually acquired by a major corporation for a multi-million-dollar sum. Maya took a deep breath. It was time to return to her first love. It was time to cook her legacy. In front of Le Jardin, the hum of her wheelchair's motor cut through the melody of the rain. The doorman James, a middle-aged man with light skin and neatly trimmed gray hair, stood beneath a large black umbrella, watching the scene with the expression of someone trying to determine whether what he was seeing was real. His eyes met Maya's, but they didn't stay there. They traveled slowly down her figure, from the low leather shoes to the elegant briefcase, and landed on the wheelchair. His gaze narrowed. There was no overt hostility, but the discomfort was unmistakable, the kind that comes from someone who had never seen a black woman in that space unless she was pouring wine or polishing silverware. He hesitated, a moment longer than he should have. His hand on the doorknob didn't move right away. Maya noticed. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice firm yet polite. James cleared his throat, adjusting the collar of his coat as if preparing to fall back on the protocol he knew so well. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Do you have a reservation?" His tone wasn't rude, but it carried an unspoken question, Are you sure you're in the right place? She nodded slightly, a subtle smile tugging at the corner of her lips. I have something better. I'm the new owner. The silence that followed was almost theatrical. James's eyes widened slightly, but he quickly masked it. He stepped back and opened the door with a slight nod of his head. Welcome, Ms. Richardson. As she crossed the threshold, the scent of white truffles and French lavender wrapped around Maya like a sensual reminder of what she had just claimed. Every meter of the dining hall looked like a living painting of opulence. But she knew, as she had so many times before, that getting in wasn't enough. She would have to assert herself. She would have to occupy that space with intelligence, elegance, and resilience. And above all, with vision. Lou Jardin now belonged to a black woman from Detroit. Paralyzed, wealthy, determined. And no one there was prepared for that. Good afternoon, Maya said again, her serene and professional smile now laced with purpose. Her voice rang out with confidence, even in the growing tension that lingered in the air like static before a storm. I have a meeting scheduled with the management. James, the doorman, kept a neutral expression, but his eyes betrayed his suspicion. A deep crease formed between his brows, and his hand rested protectively on the reservation book. I'm sorry, ma'am, but I need to check if there's a reservation under your name, he said, dragging out the words. This is an establishment that operates by confirmed reservations only. Maya kept smiling. It wasn't the first time she had to repeat the obvious just to pass through a door. It's not a reservation, she explained patiently, her tone unyielding. It's a business meeting. My name is Maya Richardson. The doorman turned slowly to the clipboard in front of him. His fingers slid across the names with almost performative slowness, as if hoping she would grow tired and leave before he got to the letter R. After several seconds that felt like minutes, he looked up again, this time wearing an expression of forced sympathy. I don't see your name here, ma'am. Perhaps there's been some sort of misunderstanding. There are other establishments in the area that might be more suitable to your needs. The word struck Maya like a cold, sharp blade. She took a deep breath. How many times had she heard variations of that sentence throughout her life? This isn't your place. You must be confused. Other places might be more appropriate. She didn't allow the frustration to show. Please call Mr. Marcel Fontaine, the general manager. He's expecting me, she said, her voice lower now, but carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. James hesitated. His face hardened, but he eventually relented. He picked up the phone and dialed with rigid fingers. No excuse me, no offer to sit down, no attempt to mask his discomfort. Just a few curt words, then silence. Minutes later, the elegant, brisk footsteps of Marcel Fontaine echoed across the marble lobby. A Frenchman with sharp features, a tailored light gray suit, piercing eyes, and a nose that seemed permanently lifted, as if even his sense of smell had been trained to distinguish what was worthy of his attention. At the sight of Maya, Marcel slowed his pace. His eyes scanned her quickly, but never met hers. He avoided direct contact, as though acknowledging her presence would somehow validate it. Ms. Richardson, I presume, he said, his thick French accent wrapping around the words like lace, polished, but faintly condescending. There was a hint of discomfort in his voice. I'm afraid there must be some mistake. Lou Jardin upholds very specific standards, and our clientele has certain expectations. Maya felt the tension rise up her spine, but she remained still, composed. She understood exactly what he meant, what he didn't say, but made perfectly clear. This wasn't about dress code or social etiquette. What he was saying, without saying it, was, people like you don't belong here. Mr. Fontaine, she replied, her voice calm but unwavering, every word precisely placed like a well-executed move in chess. I have a scheduled meeting to discuss operational matters concerning the restaurant. I suggest we speak in a more private setting. Marcel glanced around. A few patrons had begun to notice what was unfolding. An older white couple standing at the entrance of the dining room whispered to one another. A young waitress hesitated mid-step with a tray in her hands. The discomfort had spread, visible now, no longer contained. Ma'am, Marcel continued, now clearly flustered. With all due respect, this isn't the kind of establishment that offers special accommodations. He lowered his voice, as if trying to conceal the cruelty embedded in his words. Our layout was designed for a traditional fine dining experience, and I'm afraid we do not have the facilities necessary to meet your specific needs. The sentence landed like a muffled thunderclap across the marble hall. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. And Maya noticed. She always noticed. The message was loud and clear. Black. Woman. Wheelchair user. Too wealthy to ignore, but too unwanted to truly belong. She inhaled slowly, allowing the silence to become her weapon. Then she straightened, adjusted her posture in the chair, and looked directly at Marcel. For the first time, with the full intensity of someone who had spent a lifetime learning how to occupy space in a world that tried, over and over, to push her out of it. "Mr. Fontaine," she said, her voice now laced with steel and purpose. "I believe you've misunderstood the nature of my visit." Marcel froze. "I'm not here as a customer," Maya continued, her voice sharp as a blade. "I am the new owner of Le Jardin." The silence that followed was absolute. The air itself seemed to pause. James widened his eyes. The elderly couple stared, mouths slightly open. Marcel turned pale. "I purchased this restaurant from Mr. Henri Dubois. The transaction was finalized yesterday morning. All the documents are right here," she said, lifting the leather folder resting on her lap. "If you'd like, I can explain it again, in a room where you won't be embarrassed to be corrected by a black woman." The manager swallowed hard. His posture, once filled with superiority, was unraveling in front of everyone. Maya didn't blink. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lash out. But in that instant, she occupied every inch of that grand marble lobby with her dignity and her presence. And for the first time that afternoon, no one dared to question whether she belonged there. "Ma'am, please, let's not make a scene," Marcel Fontaine whispered, his voice clenched between his teeth, his French accent slipping awkwardly through the cracks of his discomfort. His cheeks, once pale, were now stained with nervous color. "I could recommend a few excellent establishments that might be more appropriate. Café Luna, just over on 87th Street, has wonderful accessibility, a much more welcoming atmosphere." That one landed. But Maya had seen it coming. She swallowed hard. She felt the heat rising from her stomach to her chest. But her face? Unchanged. Serene. Dignified. Solid, like stone sculpted by storms. She had faced this kind of violence before, polite rejection wrapped in respectable vocabulary. But each time it stung like the first. A polite refusal. A prejudice dressed in tailored sentences and respectful tones. More appropriate. More welcoming. Easier for you. Euphemisms for exclusion. Words used to disguise the fear of giving up space. All her life, Maya Richardson had carried the weight of a double exclusion. For being black and for being a woman with a disability. Many had tried to diminish her, underestimate her, push her to the margins. But she had turned every one of those wounds into fuel for her ambition. Every no became a step forward. Every humiliation, a source of momentum. And now she stood, figuratively and unapologetically, inside the marble halls of one of Manhattan's most elitist dining institutions, facing the old world head-on. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her authority came from somewhere deeper. "Very well, Mr. Fontaine," she said, with the measured calm of someone about to change the course of a tide. Maya slowly opened her Italian leather folder. The movement was deliberate, almost ceremonial. "Since there seems to be some confusion about my presence here, allow me to clarify." She removed a document. Thick paper stock. Official seals. Signatures in bold blue ink. And she extended it to him with the calm of someone carrying centuries of resistance on her back. Marcel took the paper with unsteady hands. His eyes scanned the lines with anxious speed. As he read, his posture began to collapse. His chin dropped a few millimeters. His face turned pale, then flushed, then pale again. This is a purchase agreement," he stammered, his fingers trembling over the page. Maya nodded, unhurried. Exactly. Signed yesterday by Mr. Henri Dubois. As of today, I am the new owner of Le Jardin. She paused. And you, Mr. Fontaine, have just denied your new boss entry into her own restaurant. The silence in the foyer was absolute. A silence not heard, but felt. James, the doorman, now as pale as the marble beneath his feet, looked away. Behind Maya, two waiters stopped whispering and stared, stunned. The sound of the rain, which had once tapped gently against the windows, now felt like a dramatic soundtrack orchestrated for the moment. Maya didn't move. Her breathing was steady, her chair still. But her presence grew. There, in that room adorned with decades of white exclusivity, it felt as though a new era was being born. Silent, determined, and black. For the past 3 months, she began, her voice clear and precise, I conducted full due diligence on this restaurant. Her words now rang out like surgical notes in a courtroom. I reviewed operational and financial aspects, and more importantly, I observed the staff's behavior toward different types of clientele. She looked Marcel straight in the eyes. Now, he couldn't look away. I hired a diversity consultancy firm. They made unannounced visits at various times and days. The reports I received were, let's say, illuminating. She paused, letting her words reverberate through the room. I discovered this isn't an isolated incident. Over the past few years, numerous patrons, Black, Latino, immigrant, and disabled, were politely discouraged from dining at Le Jardin. Some were never even allowed through the front door. Marcel tried to speak. Ms. Richardson, I can explain. But Maya raised her hand, a command without aggression, yet filled with unquestionable authority. No explanation is necessary, Mr. Fontaine. Your actions today confirmed everything those reports revealed. She leaned forward slightly, her face now closer to his. Le Jardin has been operating under discriminatory practices that are not only morally unacceptable, but also illegal, in violation of both state and federal civil rights laws. She reclined again, with elegance. That ends today. The final words hung in the air like a sentence. There was no immediate reaction, because everyone understood that something monumental had just occurred. The invisible structure that upheld that space, a structure made of elegant racism, veiled exclusion, and selective tradition, had just cracked in half. Maya didn't need to shout. She didn't threaten. She didn't ask for permission. She took the place that was hers. And she did it with her head held high, with the same fierce silence that had shaped her entire journey. The Black woman who grew up in Detroit, who survived a devastating accident, who conquered the tech world in Silicon Valley, was now the owner of Manhattan's temple of gastronomic elitism. And no one there would ever forget that. The crowd that had gathered in the Le Jardin foyer watched in absolute silence. The sound of the rain against the high stained glass windows now seemed distant, as if time itself had slowed down to witness the moment. Maya turned slightly in her motorized wheelchair to face the grand dining room with the poise of a leader who understood the historic weight of her presence, or in this case, of her wheels. She recognized faces, many faces. They weren't strangers. They were the power brokers of New York's elite. Renowned business magnates, art collectors, retired diplomats, social columnists, people whose opinions shaped reputations and trends. And all of them stood there, silent, watching a Black wheelchair-bound woman take command of a place once reserved for white exclusivity. Maya didn't hesitate. As the new owner of this establishment, she declared, her voice clear, never raised, but filling the space with undeniable authority. My first priority will be to implement deep changes to Le Jardin's culture and operations. Eyes met across the room, some filled with surprise, others with curiosity, and many with growing respect. This will include mandatory cultural sensitivity training, strict policies against any form of discrimination, and structural modifications to ensure full accessibility for both patrons and staff. This space will no longer be a fortress of exclusion. It will become a symbol of elegance with consciousness. Marcel Fontaine, still with his eyes lowered, took a deep breath, desperate for one last shred of control. Ms. Richardson, perhaps we could discuss this privately? Maya stared at him. Her smile was cold, calculated, framed by eyes that had faced far more hostile rooms than this one. Privately, she repeated, with a pause full of weight. Interesting that you want privacy now, after humiliating me publicly at the entrance of my own restaurant. The silence changed. It was no longer awkward, it was respectful. She then turned to the gathered crowd. Her voice now belonged to a woman who knew the world was listening. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "I apologize for the discomfort caused by this situation." She didn't apologize for being there. She apologized for them having to witness injustice. Le Jardin will undergo a period of renovation, not just aesthetically, but in its very philosophy. From this moment forward, every guest will be treated with the dignity and respect they deserve, regardless of appearance, background, or physical ability. There was a moment of pause. Then, the soft sound of footsteps on marble. An elegant elderly woman with perfectly coiffed white hair stepped forward. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, known throughout high society for her philanthropy and her monthly columns in the New York Social Observer. Her word carried more weight than many editorials. She stopped in front of Maya and gave a slight bow, not condescending, but with genuine respect. "Ms. Richardson," she said, her voice steady, "your conduct today was exemplary. I've been a patron of this restaurant for over 20 years. And I can say, with complete conviction, it was time for Le Jardin to evolve. I wholeheartedly support your renovation initiatives. Our city needs this. We as a society need this." Maya nodded, touched, yet steady. Another client stepped forward. David Chun, a Chinese-American biotech entrepreneur known for his discretion and generosity toward social causes. At his side stood his wife and 2 teenage daughters. "Ms. Richardson," he began, "my family and I have experienced uncomfortable treatment here in the past. We were never turned away, of course, but we were welcomed with less warmth than our peers. It's reassuring to know this restaurant is now under your leadership, and more than that, under your vision." Other clients began to stir. Expressions of approval, subtle but unmistakable support, shared smiles, glances of relief. Not all of them, of course. Some still stood frozen, uncertain of how to respond. But the atmosphere had changed. The balance had shifted. And the dominant voice in that room now belonged to Maya. Marcel, feeling the tide turn, stepped back 2 paces, then forward again, a desperate gesture of self-preservation. "Ms. Richardson," he began, his posture now diminished. "I made a serious mistake today. There's no excuse. But please give me a chance to learn and to do better." Maya looked at him for a long moment, not with anger, but with the weight of someone who carries centuries of exclusion and yet still offers dignity where humanity was once withheld. "Mr. Fontaine," she said slowly, "real change requires more than momentary remorse. It requires action, commitment, and humility. If you're truly willing to offer that, we can talk later." She dismissed him with a subtle gesture, and then turned to the clients and staff. "Le Jardin is under new leadership," she announced, "and everyone is invited to be part of this new story. A story that begins today." Polite applause began. Then it grew. A small gesture, but a powerful one. Not of flattery, but of recognition. Maya took a deep breath. For the first time since she had arrived, she was truly inside her restaurant. Not just physically, but spiritually, socially, and above all historically. Because, at that moment, she wasn't just the new owner of a luxury restaurant. She was the living symbol of a shift that had taken generations to arrive. Maya watched him in silence. For a long, uncomfortable moment, she simply stared at Marcel Fontaine, with a look that spoke more than 1,000 words. A heavy silence that forced him to confront his own reflection, not in a mirror, but in the shame mirrored in the eyes of everyone around him. Finally, she spoke. "Mr. Fontaine," she said with icy calm, "discrimination is not a mistake. A mistake is forgetting a name, missing a meeting. What you did today was a choice. You chose to judge me based on prejudiced assumptions. You chose to exclude me, to diminish me, to discredit me. With each word, Marcel shrank. The mask of arrogance had shattered, and what remained was a man standing before an undeniable truth. You chose not to treat me with the most basic professionalism and respect, the same respect any visitor deserves, whether they are a CEO or a delivery person. Maya paused briefly, took a deep breath, carefully chose what would come next. But I believe, even when the world has given me every reason not to, in the possibility of change. She lifted her chin slightly. You have two options. You can submit to an intensive diversity and inclusion training program, one that will include education on civil rights, anti-discrimination practices, and cultural sensitivity. Or you may submit your immediate resignation. Marcel, flushed and his eyes brimming with tears, answered in a trembling voice. I accept the training. Please, allow me to learn. Maya nodded slowly. Very well. But let me be clear, this is your only chance. Any further display of discriminatory behavior will result in immediate termination and possible legal action. She then turned to the doorman, James, who until then had remained motionless, like a decorative statue, useful only until the wrong person crossed the right door. Mr. James, she said with the same firmness, your actions today were also unacceptable. You had the chance to be welcoming. You chose to be an obstacle. James stammered, his voice rough with tension. Ms. Richardson, I didn't know. Maya cut him off with a question that sliced through the air. You didn't know what? That people deserve to be treated with basic respect? That making assumptions based on someone's appearance is wrong? Or that discrimination is a crime, punishable by law? James lowered his head, speechless, because there was no excuse strong enough to survive the raw truth. Maya turned once again toward the room. Now, she was the one commanding the space. With elegance, with presence, with earned authority. Le Jardin has a 50-year reputation to uphold. But reputations can and must evolve. And my leadership will not be built on exclusion or elitism. It will be built on culinary excellence, true hospitality, and human dignity. Some of the guests were already applauding quietly. Others listened intently, as if witnessing history being rewritten in real time. In the coming weeks, Maya said, this restaurant will undergo significant renovations. We will install access ramps, redesign the restrooms to ensure full accessibility, and restructure the interior layout so that all bodies can occupy this space with comfort and dignity. It was then that Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, ever elegant, stepped forward once more. Her serene gaze now held quiet tears. Bravo, Ms. Richardson, she said, clapping firmly. Le Jardin has needed this evolution for years. Today, you've given us more than a lesson in leadership. You've given us hope. The applause grew, now spontaneous, strong, coming from different corners of the room. People of all backgrounds, black, Asian, white, Latinx, united in that rarest of moments, witnessing justice happen live. Maya smiled, for the first time since arriving. But it wasn't a smile of relief. It was a smile of beginning. Beyond the physical renovations, she continued, eyes gleaming, we are also renewing our menu. And for that, I've partnered with one of the greatest names in contemporary cuisine. The award-winning chef Marcus Johnson, multiple James Beard winner. Someone in the back let out a wow. Others exchanged excited glances. We will be incorporating Afro-American, Latinx, Asian, and Caribbean culinary influences, reflecting the multicultural richness of New York City. We won't just serve food. We will tell stories. We will build connections. We will redefine what it means to be a prestigious restaurant. She paused, then concluded, because true luxury is inclusion. And in that moment, beneath the crystal chandeliers and polished marble of the old Le Jardin, something new was born. It wasn't just the reopening of a restaurant. It was the rebirth of a legacy, written by a black woman, resilient and determined to change the world, one doorway at a time. Chef Marcus Johnson wasn't just a renowned name in the culinary world. He was a living symbol of resistance and reinvention. A multiple James Beard Award winner, author of acclaimed books on African American culinary heritage, and a sought-after lecturer at top universities, Marcus had become a fierce advocate for diversity in haute cuisine, a traditionally closed and elitist space. His presence in the Le Jardin project was no accident. It was a manifesto. Maya watched the room's reaction, sensing the shift in energy. Like the air before a storm, except this time it was a storm of transformation. Our goal, she said calmly, is not just to serve award-winning dishes. It's to create a space where culinary excellence walks hand in hand with true inclusion. Her eyes swept across the room, meeting gazes filled with approval, curiosity, and even emotion. A place where Black, Asian, Latinx, white, and indigenous families can celebrate special moments. Where LGBTQIA+ professionals and people of all ethnicities can hold business meetings without feeling invisible. Where people with disabilities don't have to ask for permission to exist. Where no one needs to fit in, because the space was already made to embrace. The transformation was tangible. What had started as an uncomfortable confrontation now echoed like a rebirth ceremony. Customers who had once watched in silence, perhaps expecting a scandal, were now smiling. They were faces that deep down wanted to be part of something greater. David Chun, with his wife beside him, stepped forward once more. There was a new expression on his face, genuine excitement. "Ms. Richardson," he said, "please put me on the list for reopening night. My wife and I can't wait to experience this new chapter of Le Jardin." Other customers followed his lead. Business cards were discreetly handed over. Invitations exchanged. Smiles shared. Maya felt, deep in her chest, that something far greater than a change in management was happening there. Le Jardin will reopen in 6 weeks, she announced, with calm confidence. And during that time, every employee will undergo intensive training. Inclusive hospitality, cultural history, disability awareness. She looked into the eyes of everyone around her. Every person on this team will be an ambassador of our new philosophy. Respect, equity, and true welcome. Marcel Fontaine, still digesting the enormity of the transition ahead, timidly posed a hesitant question. And what about our longtime customers? Those who may not be comfortable with so many changes. Maya didn't smile, but she didn't flinch either. She turned to him like a teacher answering a question she had long expected. "Mr. Fontaine," she said with sharp calmness, "if we have clients who are uncomfortable sharing a room with people of different backgrounds, colors, or abilities, then those are not the clients we want." A brief silence. The new Le Jardin celebrates diversity. It doesn't tolerate it. It exalts it. It invites it. It puts it at the center. Before the silence could return, Mrs. Eleanor Whitman stepped forward again with her usual dignified poise, though her eyes now shimmered with emotion. "Ms. Richardson," she said in a solemn, proud tone, "I can assure you that the true New York society, the one that has evolved with the times, will support your initiatives. This restaurant is not being lost. It is being reclaimed." As customers began to disperse, many approached to greet Maya. Some offered partnerships, others simply words of support. But all left Le Jardin with a new image of that space, and of the woman now leading it. Maya finally crossed the restaurant's front door as the owner, no longer a stranger. She took a deep breath. The interior still carried the unmistakable luxury of its golden years. High, ornate ceilings, walls draped in French silk, antique Venetian mirrors, polished marble floors. It was like stepping into a palace. But Maya didn't see a palace. She saw a stage of possibilities. A place that would soon reflect her story, her struggle, her vision. She touched the edge of one of the carved wooden columns. And with a slight smile, she murmured, "Mom, we made it." But Maya looked beyond the crystal chandeliers. As she gazed into the grand interior of Le Jardin, her eyes weren't caught by the opulence. She saw possibilities. She saw wider corridors, accessible to any type of wheelchair. Tables with adjustable heights, where every guest could dine with dignity. Bathrooms completely redesigned, with grab bars, lowered sinks, and spaces that respected everybody. She saw a layout that was fluid, elegant, yet functional, where no one would have to ask permission to exist. And so, the silent revolution began. In the following days, what happened at Le Jardin echoed throughout Manhattan, and soon across the entire United States. The video, discreetly recorded by one of the patrons, went viral. A black woman in a wheelchair facing the high elite head-on and coming out victorious. The New York Times ran a front-page story titled, "Maya Richardson, the new face of fine dining." The report detailed her journey, from a nurse's daughter in Detroit to the founder of a billion-dollar app in Silicon Valley, and now, owner of the most iconic restaurant on the Upper East Side. The article highlighted her bold vision, not just to renovate a restaurant, but to reimagine what it means to belong in luxury spaces. CNN called soon after. They invited Maya for a live primetime interview. She showed up in her classic navy blazer, the same Italian leather portfolio on her lap, and an expression of serene determination. Discrimination isn't just about denying entry or looking the other way, Maya said, looking straight into the camera. It's about building environments where certain people always feel watched, tested, diminished. It's feeding day after day the lie that we, black people, people with disabilities, don't belong in centers of excellence. The host, visibly moved, asked, "And what do you want to prove with the new Le Jardin?" Maya smiled. That excellence and inclusion are not opposites. They are allies. When we celebrate diversity, the world doesn't lose sophistication, it gains soul. The next 6 weeks were a whirlwind of non-stop activity. Maya hired a team of universal accessibility consultants who redesigned the entire restaurant architecture based on the principles of design for all. Every corner of the new Le Jardin would say, without words, "You are welcome here." She also forged partnerships with Black, Latino, and Asian community organizations from Harlem, the Bronx, and Brooklyn, building bridges between the restaurant and communities long made invisible. Inside the kitchen, the revolution had a name and a face. Chef Marcus Johnson. The menu he created was a poetic fusion of tradition and innovation. It combined classic French culinary techniques with ingredients, spices, and stories from black families of the American South, Caribbean islands, and African communities in New York. Among the highlights were Georgia Coast bouillabaisse made with fresh fish, okra, and a light touch of palm oil. Caribbean spiced coq au vin with aged rum, Scotch bonnet pepper, and plantation herbs. Harlem-style cassoulet with black-eyed peas, smoked oxtail, and a crispy cornmeal crust. Each dish came with a small card telling the story of its inspiration, turning every meal into an experience of ancestry and belonging. But Maya wanted to go beyond the kitchen. She created a culinary mentorship program for young Black, Latino, and Asian individuals, with a special focus on women and people with disabilities. They would receive paid internships at Le Jardin, access to renowned chefs, and classes with international experts. "I didn't have mentors when I started," she explained at a press conference. But that doesn't mean the next generation has to face the same path alone. For many young people who had never dreamed of walking through the front door of a restaurant like Le Jardin, Maya was now opening every door and tearing down those that should never have existed. And so, brick by brick, name by name, recipe by recipe, Maya Richardson was rebuilding not just a restaurant, but a symbol. A new Le Jardin was born. Fairer, more beautiful, more authentic. The night of Le Jardin's reopening arrived as an event that stopped Manhattan. Outside, rows of black vehicles with uniformed drivers lined 73rd Street, under the soft glow of historic lampposts and flashes from the local press. But unlike other events on the Upper East Side, that night wasn't just about luxury. It was about legacy. Maya Richardson had made a point to invite a carefully diverse list. Not just CEOs and politicians, but educators from Harlem, activists from Staten Island, young artists from the Bronx, small business owners from Brooklyn, and Black, Latino, and Asian families who had never stepped foot in a hall like that before. Every name on the list said, "You belong here." Among the first to arrive were Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, in a discreet pearl dress, and her granddaughter, Camille, a young lawyer advocating for civil rights and inclusion for people with disabilities. Camille, seeing the discreetly integrated access elevators blending into the classic architecture, smiled. "This is the future, Grandma." Soon after, David Chun entered with his wife, children, and elderly parents. His father, Mr. Chun, looked around the room with teary eyes. "For the first time, I feel like I can be in a place like this without worrying about what others think." Maya, wearing a tailored royal blue elegant dress, stood positioned right at the main entrance. She greeted each guest with a steady smile, an attentive gaze, and a welcoming gesture that blended grace and authority. 6 weeks earlier, she had been denied entry. Now, she was the gravitational center of the entire evening. "It's an honor to have you here. You are very welcome. Tonight, this house is yours." Each greeting was more than courtesy. It was settling accounts with history. Marcel Fontaine, now without the arrogance that once accompanied him, approached discreetly. He wore a classic dark suit, carried himself with calm posture, and held a sincere look. "Mrs. Richardson," he began, his voice restrained, "thank you for not giving up on me. These weeks have taught me more than my entire career. I have seen the world through different lenses." Maya stared at him for a moment. She recognized that the greatest revolutions begin within people. "Real change requires the humility to unlearn," she replied. "I'm glad you chose to grow." The main hall, now remodeled, was a spectacle of harmony between tradition and accessibility. Invisible ramps integrated into the floor frames, elegant adapted chairs, soft lighting aimed for visual comfort, wide corridors, and an intoxicating aroma of spices lingering in the air. Chef Marcus Johnson, visibly moved, commanded the kitchen with military precision and ancestral passion. The dishes coming out of the kitchen were true cultural statements, a symphony between France and the African diaspora, between tradition and memory. During dinner, Maya moved gracefully among the tables, listening to guests' comments. "I never imagined finding Creole shrimp in such a refined presentation. This reinterpretation of cassoulet, my grandmother would be proud. The atmosphere, it's as if it was made for me." And then, an unexpected moment. Dr. Angela Davis, a living icon of the civil rights struggle, stood up. With a glass of champagne in hand and the room in respectful silence, she said, "Tonight is more than a reopening. It is a reconstruction. It is the reunion of elegance with justice, tradition with humanity. Maya Richardson, you have not just opened doors. You have built new ones." Applause thundered through the hall. Some guests applauded with tears in their eyes. Others, silently, simply felt the weight of that historic moment. Maya looked toward a special table, positioned beneath one of the large Venetian mirrors. There was Sarah Richardson, her mother, elegant in a deep wine-colored dress. She carried in her eyes the weariness of a lifetime of struggle, and the glow of a victory now made real. Maya approached slowly. Sarah took her hand. "I knew it, my daughter. Since the time you turned a broken microwave into an improvised oven. I knew." In the months that followed, Le Jardin became the city's most talked-about restaurant. Not just for the food, but for what it represented. It received awards for culinary excellence, yes, but also for social innovation, inclusive architecture, community impact, and the leadership of Black women in the hospitality sector. Articles, documentaries, international panels. But what mattered most to Maya was something else. Every time a young Black woman in a wheelchair entered that dining room, she was not interrupted. She was celebrated. 1 year after that historic night, Maya Richardson's legacy transcended the walls of Le Jardin. Driven by the mission to open doors that had long been locked for many young Black people and people with disabilities, Maya founded the Le Jardin Foundation, an initiative offering full scholarships to students from underrepresented communities who dreamed of building careers in the culinary industry. But she didn't stop there. She also created an exclusive mentorship program dedicated to supporting Black entrepreneurs and people with disabilities who wanted to bring their dreams of opening their own businesses to life. Through the foundation, Maya provided not only financial resources, but also connections, training, and a support network that reflected what she herself had found, or wished to have found, throughout her journey. Marcel Fontaine's personal transformation became a living symbol of change. From a resistant, prejudiced manager, he evolved into a passionate advocate for diversity and inclusion in the hospitality industry. His testimonies at conferences and workshops echoed a sincere call, an invitation to confront the invisible prejudices that persist behind the scenes of luxury. Marcel conveyed the message that true elegance begins with respect for differences. James, the doorman, also wrote his own chapter of overcoming, once the face of hesitation and judgment. Today, he became an example of learning and humility. He engaged in community education and awareness programs, helping others recognize and break cycles of discrimination and ignorance. For many, James was living proof that when you face your own shadow, it is possible to be reborn more conscious and compassionate. On the anniversary of a reopening, Le Jardin was honored with the coveted Restaurant of the Year award by the James Beard Foundation, one of the highest accolades in the culinary world. On stage, under the spotlight, Maya spoke with firm voice and restrained emotion. Just 1 year ago, I was prevented from entering my own restaurant because of prejudice against my appearance and my disability. Today, Le Jardin is living proof that when we break down barriers and embrace diversity, we all grow not only financially, but as human beings. She continued, "This award is not mine. It belongs to every employee who committed to change, every customer who believed in our vision, and the communities that inspired us to be better every day." Le Jardin's impact extended beyond the borders of the Upper East Side. Business schools and hospitality management colleges across the country began studying Maya's model as an example of business success and cultural transformation. Students from distant places came to New York to learn how a Black, paraplegic, and determined woman managed to turn the tables in a sector traditionally dominated by closed elites. Maya became a respected voice at conferences on entrepreneurship, diversity, and overcoming adversity. Her story resonated especially among young Black people with disabilities who saw in her a beacon, proof that despite the barriers, success was possible. In her talks, she always left a clear message. My success did not come despite being a Black woman in a wheelchair, but because I used the unique perspectives and resilience that those experiences gave me. Le Jardin's transformation also spurred changes throughout New York's culinary industry. High-end restaurants began reviewing their own practices, adopting inclusion and accessibility policies that became national references. The city implemented new accessibility standards based on Le Jardin's example, becoming a model for other metropolises around the world. True to her commitment to the community, Maya expanded her philanthropic efforts, partnering with public schools in low-income neighborhoods. There, culinary programs integrated teaching of cooking techniques, entrepreneurship, nutrition, and cultural history, a holistic education through food. These spaces became cradles of new dreams and talents. Le Jardin also established itself as a platform for discussions about social justice. The restaurant began hosting charity events, panel discussions, and meetings that brought together leaders, activists, and engaged citizens. Each event was a reaffirmation. Haute cuisine could, and should, also be an agent of change. Thus, Maya Richardson not only transformed a restaurant, she revolutionized an industry, inspired a generation, and forever changed how the world views the intersection of race, disability, and success. Le Jardin was no longer just a prestigious place. It was a living symbol of hope, inclusion, and justice. Every month, Maya organized themed dinners at Le Jardin, celebrating the richness and diversity of the cultures that made up the soul of New York and the country as a whole. It was more than a gastronomic experience. It was a living tribute to the stories, flavors, and traditions of marginalized communities. And that wasn't all. A significant portion of the proceeds from these events was donated to organizations fighting for civil rights, social inclusion, and accessibility. For Maya, the restaurant had become a vehicle for social transformation, as powerful as any speech or demonstration. 5 years after that humiliating October afternoon, when she had been barred from entering her own dream, Maya sat in her spacious, sunlit office at Le Jardin, diligently reviewing plans for the opening of a second restaurant, now in Los Angeles. She had become one of the most respected and influential entrepreneurs in the country, admired not only for financial success, but for the strength of her transformative vision. Despite all the glory, Maya never let pride blind her. The lessons from that difficult first day were etched into her soul, guiding every decision. At that moment, a soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Marcel Fontaine, the same man who, years ago, had tried to deny her entry to Le Jardin. Now he was her right-hand man, a leader in the mission of inclusion and diversity that defined the restaurant. "Maya," Marcel said with a warm smile, "I just got a very interesting call. Harvard Business School wants to develop a case study on Le Jardin's transformation." Maya smiled, a gleam of satisfaction mixed with humility lighting her eyes. It's amazing how things can change when we're willing to grow and learn, isn't it? Later that night, Maya returned to her apartment on the Upper West Side, a space elegantly designed for accessibility without sacrificing comfort and style. She always made time to call her mother, Sarah Richardson, the woman who had sacrificed so much for Maya to get where she was. "Mom," Maya began, her voice heavy with emotion, "sometimes I still find it hard to believe everything that's happened." On the other end of the line, Sarah, now 65 and retired thanks to her daughter's success, responded with that loving, proud laugh. "Maya, my daughter, I always knew you would change the world. You just had to find the right way to do it." As she watched the twinkling lights of the city that never sleeps, Maya felt the depth of her journey, from pain and humiliation to victory and inspiring leadership. Le Jardin was no longer just a luxury restaurant on the Upper East Side. It had become a living symbol of resistance, courage, and hope. A beacon showing that real change is possible when determined people refuse to accept the status quo and fight to build a fairer, more inclusive world. Maya Richardson's story was already being told and retold in classrooms, conferences, and community gatherings, inspiring a new generation of Black entrepreneurs, people with disabilities, and activists. And every time someone crossed Le Jardin's door and was greeted with dignity and respect, Maya's message echoed strongly. We belong in every space of excellence. Our diversity is our greatest strength, and the power to transform the world is in our hands.